This is WorkSpan TV. I'm Ryan Johnson from World at Work. I'm with Mike Halloran of Mercer, and we're going to talk about shareholder engagement. Is it really necessary? Mike, obviously we've seen say on pay in the last few years and the institutional investors becoming more active. So let me pose the very simple question. How important is shareholder engagement today?
In general, it's quite important, Ryan, and I'd put that into two categories. For companies who've had a say on pay vote that was perhaps less than desirable, less than 80% or even lower, I think most feel that they've had to get out and begin interacting with shareholders early. I mean shareholders by large institutional shareholders, to talk about what concerns they might have had about their pay programs, what may have led to negative votes if they had any, and try to make sure that they've been able to tell their story in advance of the next year, be it year 2 or year 3 or wherever it might be.
Mike, what trends are you seeing in terms of shareholder engagement?
The trends we're seeing is that most companies, even the better performing ones, are finding the need to go out and meet with their shareholders to talk about their pay programs. Being proactive is helpful, they believe, because to the extent that something might change over the course of a year in terms of investors' views of the company, that they need to have had planted the seed and begun the education process so that when it comes time for voting the next year, if they can't get to them or get to them on a timely basis, they've been able to at least tell part of the story. But in these days, it's become kind of a two-step process. One, you want to talk to them perhaps in the off-season, late summer, early fall, and then again as needed early in the next year once your proxy has come out or about to come out, in that time frame between the issuance of a proxy, say in mid-March, and a shareholder meeting in mid-May.
Is it possible to over-communicate, or how do you know if you're doing enough, or how do you know if you're doing too much?
Well, I think most really don't know if they're doing too much. I think most believe there's never not enough. There's a bit of a balance though. I mean, if you think about an institutional shareholder that holds positions in thousands of stocks, thinking they're getting calls every day from companies who want to meet, so being able to find time on their schedule, on yours, and be able to get your message across is not an easy thing to do, but that's where the focus is these days.
Is the pendulum swinging too far towards institutional investors or towards some of these advisory groups?
The pendulum clearly has swung where the advisory groups have significant influence. And they tend to have it for many institutions, those in particular that have very lean staffs and don't have the time at a minimum, or the staff, to really thoughtfully vote on the various proxy issues that are put forth. So the ISS, Glass Lewis, and other advisory firms have noticeable influence. At the same time, many of the larger institutions read what they have to say but do their own voting. And they are the group that may notice a negative comment, but then you have the ability, if you meet with your institutions, to tell them your side of the story, and they do give you some thoughtful reactions.
So if I'm coming to you, Mike, and let's say my company just passed with, say, a 50 or a 60% vote, what's the first thing you're going to suggest that we do as a company?
The first thing one needs to do is to step back and look at what are the reasons that may have led to that negative vote. Many companies have a view of some of the reasons, but perhaps not all, but you need to do a fairly thorough look to say, in a kind of self-assessment, what's good and what's not strong with our programs. Once you've identified that, the question then becomes, what might we want to change? Having decided to make some change, then it's time to go out and communicate with shareholders in terms of the actions you've taken to try to improve the programs, to make them stronger where they were perceived to be weak, and steps like that.
What's the best case scenario that you've seen? Have you seen a company go from, say, 50 to 80 or 90, and what was involved?
There are a number of scenarios that we've seen and everyone has seen in the past year where in the first year of say on pay, the vote was less than desirable, maybe even a loss, but certainly in the 50s or 60s. And many have turned that around in the second year into an 80 or 90% positive vote. Not everyone, but most. So that's the hope and the outcome now that you want to have. The issue becomes, one, can you make the right changes? Two, have you appeased those that were concerned? But also the other factor in all of this is shareholder performance in terms of stock price is clearly a bit of a mix in the mix here. Those with very strong shareholder return are going to be given a pretty big benefit of the doubt because shareholders have benefited. It's those where the shareholder performance has been somewhat weak or less than desired where you may need to do some heavier lifting to tell your story.
My impression is that this is going to continue to evolve as we learn more, as companies get more sophisticated, shareholders get more sophisticated. What evolution do you see in the near term?
I would say that what we're going to see is a focus more on a handful of areas that people would perceive as general program weaknesses, and most will do away with those. Other than that, I think you're going to find more emphasis, not that there hasn't been already, in telling a company's unique story in their CDNA, but doing it in the first 2 to 3 pages, because most will acknowledge reading 15, 20, 30 pages and thoughtfully understanding all of it is something that many institutions don't have the time for in today's world.
Mike, some great insights on the necessity of shareholder engagement in today's world. Again, I want to thank Mike Halloran from Mercer for WorkSpan TV and World at Work. I'm Ryan Johnson.